Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Fox, and in today's video I'll be bringing you part 2 of my continuing best PvP builds for TU12 and beyond series. I appreciate that is a bit of a mouthful. Today's video will be covering DPS builds. We'll be looking at an Intimidate Adrenaline Rush Lady Death build. I know people either love or hate it, but you know, the whole point of this series is to give you guys the best and easiest to farm for builds, and that build definitely kind of ticks all the boxes. We'll then look at a spotter in sync build using a shield, and then we'll finish on the third and final build as a more traditional standard no shield AR build that works very well in the Dark Zone and in PvP. The fourth and final part of this video will just be a couple of honourable mentions of some great talents for your chest, backpack and weapon, and with some honourable mention builds as well, so just a little bit of extra at the end. You know, you can sort of put together a basic build with all the right pieces and then use the talents that you prefer. So I'll drop in some underrated yet very close to meta talents. Now, if you do like the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. We do have an active Discord server as well. If you go in the description below, you will see the timestamps for all parts of this video. You'll see part 1 of this series, which is the tanks guide, the best tank builds in TU 12.1 and beyond. Yeah, don't forget to hit that notification bell icon as well if you do wish to be notified of future videos. I predominantly post PvP and PvE build videos for the Division 2 with the occasional Destiny 2 content as well. So let's get started. We're now going to go into the first build of today's video. So here we are with build number 1, the one you all know and love, the Hunter's Fury Intimidate Adrenaline Rush with Lady Death. This build has so much multiplicative damage that keeps increasing on each kill that it is pretty much the best build to run in the game for DPS players at the moment, whether you are Dark Zone, Conflict. You can see here I've spec'd this to 4 blues. You could even use the Hunter Killer and get it on 5 blues and it would still hit ridiculously hard. There's a lot of reasons to use this build, and whether you hate it or love it, if you try it out, you know, there's no denying that it will get you a lot of kills and help your team get some victories in Conflict and some large manhunt numbers in the Dark Zone. What we'll do in the usual format of my videos is start from the top, the specialisation. We'll work our way down to the skills at the bottom, and then we'll look at the stats of this build, at which point I will move on to build number 2. Let's get started. We are using Gunner for this particular variant. Now, you will more often than not see Firewall for a few reasons. It has a better shield that gives you increased damage. It has a very powerful armor kit, quite simply the best in the game for PvP by quite a large margin, I would say, actually. And it has a very good grenade as well. What it will also do is enhance everybody else's damage to enemies that you are within 10 meters of. I did opt for Gunner with this particular variant with the Hunter's Fury for a few reasons. There are a lot of great passives with Gunner which really enhance Hunter's Fury. The armor on kill stacks with Hunter's Fury as well. You get increased handling if you stay stationary. You get a faster reload, a much faster reload every third reload, which is amazing for the Lady Death, as you know, the faster you're firing again, the more DPS you'll do and the more likely you will be to close the kill. You gain, for those longer Dark Zone runs, 10% of your total ammo reserves back every minute, and 5% goes to the rest of your team, so that's another useful feature. The armor kit is a 30% bonus armor boost on top of the 100% base armor healed, so that's 1.5 million of our base, and 30% of that will be, I think it's a 10-second bonus armor window, which is fantastic as that also procs Intimidate. And we have a foam grenade that's either going to flush somebody out of cover by sticking them to the floor, making their head visible, or force them to dodge roll out. Either way, it should be easy for you to close the kill. So I like Gunner here, but you will more often than not see Firewall. Which one you use is entirely based on your playstyle, and I highly recommend that you try both. We are of course using the Lady Death. This is quite simply the best PvP weapon in the game at the moment, and it has been since it was launched, for the main reason that when we enable the PvP stats, it gives us a total of 60% amplified damage. With regards to amplified damage, for those that are a little bit unsure, I did cover additive versus multiplicative in a previous video, and the build that I used is actually the second build in this video as well. So if you check the link at the top of your screens now, and in the description of course, you can go to that to get a better understanding of additive versus multiplicative and why you want to spec your builds to focus more on multiplicative. Amplified is also multiplicative, but it is applied in a separate bracket at the end of the equation, which means it usually gives you the highest gains, and this build is coated in amplified damage. What Lady Death also gives us is a 20% movement speed boost for 10 seconds upon kill. This is now the only movement speed boost in the game, and it just makes this weapon even more powerful. And all we need to do to build up the stacks to gain that 60% amplified damage is to move or sprint. Ridiculously easy to use weapon, very powerful, and I highly recommend that you get on board with it, even if you are not a fan. It will just get you so many kills. As is the case with most of my PvP build videos, if you're running an SMG or shotgun, basically a short range weapon as your main, you need to be running a longer range weapon as your secondary. I almost always opt for an assault rifle over something like a rifle or a sniper, purely because you get the 21% damage to health maximum, which is very effective versus deployed skills such as Seekers, Stinger Hives and Mortar Turrets. Sidearm I never use on this build, but if you ever are going to use one, I highly recommend that you get your hands on the Orbit, which is a DZ exclusive Magnum with the perfect finisher talent. However, any standard version of finisher is still best in slot, so you don't need to have the Orbit if you don't have it. Moving down to the gear pieces, we are using 4-piece Hunter's Fury all rolled to blue, so this is a 4 blue 2 red build, and this build works even with 5 blues. You can go less for conflict, 3 blues is usually best, but I feel that just 4 blues overall is best in slot. And as Hunters is easily crafted if you completed last season. If not, it's incredibly easily farmed. If you do it in the summit, the minor attribute is weighted towards a red attribute such as crit chance or crit damage, which is absolutely what you want. You can then just roll them to blue. So really, really easy to put this build together. It's literally 2 Sokolov, 4 Hunter's Fury rolled to blue. The 2-piece gives us 15% SMG damage, which is a nice little buff to our base damage. The 3-piece then gives us 20% armor on kill and 100% health on kill, which lends itself beautifully towards going on to the next kill, particularly with Lady Death with that movement speed boost. And if you do run Gunner, that will then go to 30%. I definitely prefer Gunner for Dark Zone and Firewall for Conflict, but that 30% armor on kill is pretty insane with just how quickly this build can chain kills. Its kill chaining capabilities are enhanced even further by the 4-piece, which is actually 2 separate talents, both of which offer amplified damage on top of everything else we've just discussed. Enemies within 15 meters receive a debuff, amplifying your weapon damage against them by 20%. That's on top of the 60 that we gained from Lady D. And then the second part, which is the on-kill part of the talent, killing a debuffed enemy with your weapon disorients other enemies within 5 meters, which is pretty lackluster in PvP admittedly. But it also amplifies weapon damage by a further 5% for 10 seconds, and this even stacks up to 5 times. Now admittedly, if you go for the more traditional Lady Death build with Foxes, Contractors, Coyotes, Double Sokolov, that kind of thing, you do achieve just a little bit more damage in the first kill, so before you've gotten a kill essentially, and the Coyotes buff will spread to everybody else, which technically makes that a better build. However, it is much harder to farm for and put together, and as soon as you get just 1 kill with a Hunter's Fury variant, it then becomes more powerful. You still won't be spreading that 25% Coyotes buff to everyone, which is a big loss, but I'm sure somebody else in your team will have that if you run this build. So yeah, Hunter's Fury, super easy to put together, very, very powerful, and once you've gotten that first kill, you just keep gaining more and more amplified damage. It's ridiculous. What you want to do is get as many pieces with crit chance and or crit damage as possible. It is very important to hit that crit chance cap, so definitely aim for that 60% first, and then just put everything else, including your mods, into crit damage, which is exactly what I've done with this mask here. Roll to armor, crit chance on, and then a 12% crit damage mod. My gloves are crit damage, and you can see none of these pieces are that well optimized, but this build still just melts. Same thing here, crit chance isn't maxed out, but we've rolled it to armor, and then I did luckily get a 12% crit damage holster just here. The 2 high-end pieces that you want to run are either Double Sokolov or Sokolov and Grupo, as they both equate to the same thing, which is 10% SMG damage, once again a nice boost to our base damage, and then 15% critical hit damage. Critical hit damage stacks very well with multiplicative and amplified damage, and we have tons of that on this build, so you really want to be getting that stat as high as possible. I got very lucky with this chest piece, but what you need to be aiming for with both your chest and your backpack is to have basically this, as high as possible weapon damage, crit chance and crit damage, and you can see the backpack is basically the same minus a few little percentages here and there. And you need to be aiming for Intimidate on your chest, as this is another multiplicative, or amplified should I say, damage talent. Whilst you have bonus armor, amplifies total weapon damage by 35% to enemies within 10 meters. We gain our source of bonus armor from Adrenaline Rush, and if we switched it over to PvP, you'll see that whenever we are within that same 10 meter radius, we gain 10% bonus armor, which is great as we have 1.5 million armor on this build for 5 seconds, but you can have 3 separate procs for that, each with their own cooldown. So it is absolutely possible to have 30% at the same time if you're next to, say, 2 rogue agents and one of their skills. With regards to the skills that I've chosen, you don't need to use any of these, but I think they both lend themselves well to the Intimidate side of this build. It's by having a shield, you are not only increasing your own survivability, being a tier 4 shield, but you are also retaining your Adrenaline Rush bonus armor for longer, as when you take damage, bonus armor is lost first, and only then does it go into your own personal armor pool. So the shield, particularly against players that are not a very good aim, will just take that damage instead of your bonus armor, which means your Intimidate is up for longer. So lots of reasons to use the Crusader Shield. It's just taking all that damage that you normally would, which means you can chain your kills, get your armor on kill, and just move on to the next one. The second skill that I like to use for similar reasons is the Decoy. Hunter's Fury Lady Death build is one of the best flank builds in the game because of the speed boost and just the ridiculous burst that you can get on someone if they don't know you're there. The Decoy will also take away your armor and health stat from above your head and onto your Decoy, so if it is out of sight, this usually forces, or should I say causes, your enemy to stay in the fight longer than they should, as they simply can't see how low you are. And with your shield and your 4 blue, you're going to kill them first. They'll just think that they're about to kill you, but they won't even be close with this build. You can also use an EMP Sticky Bomb, a Jammer, EMP Jammer, a Booster Hive as well is very good here. There's quite a few different skills that you could use, so that the skill part of this build is very flexible. But I definitely recommend trying out this combination if you really want to go ultimate sweaty meta and just get as many kills as is humanly possible. What we'll now do is have a look at the stats on the build, and then we'll move into the second AR build. So my base PvP damage is 26,700 just about. Of course that will be buffed by all of the different sources of amplified damage from everything else on the build. Because we had crit chance rolled onto a lot of our pieces, we were able to hit that crit chance cap. Don't forget that Lady Death comes with 21% max by default, so you want to try and get that double Sokolov chest and backpack on first, and then you can see which of your Hunter's Fury pieces you can use and roll to blue. You don't want to go too high in crit chance because it will cap out at that 60%. I'll definitely have some optimizing to do, but 147.3 is my current crit damage, and all of these other stats here are just based on my watch level being over 1,000. If you go down to my armor stats, you'll see that I'm currently at 1.474 million with the 4 blues, and every kill, or every down should I say, I gain 442,000 of my own armor pullback. This is fantastic, particularly in the dark zone. If there's a few sort of stragglers, red bars about, NPCs, you can just kill those, top yourself off whilst the agents are coming in, and you'll be right back where you started without using an armor kit. No armor regen on this build as it isn't necessary. Health on kill comes from, of course, Hunter's Fury. And then the rest of this once again is based on a maxed out watch level. So that is build number 1, definitely the most powerful PvP build in the game at the moment, and as I said earlier, if you haven't tried this you really need to get on board with it, it just does too much damage. What we're now going to do is have a look at a Spotter Vigilance in sync build. So moving on to build number 2, this build uses some of the best talents in the game, and this is, in my opinion, the single best way to use an AR build. We have 4 blues on here again, so we have a huge amount of survivability, but with this particular version we have stacked so much multiplicative damage and crit chance and crit damage. When combined with the in-sync talent, this build rips through enemy players. The advantage is that you can now do this from range, so if you are coming up against a Hunter's Fury Lady Death user, as in the first build of this video, you can just gun them down from range. You can pulse them just by ADSing at them so that you can see where they are, and this is a very effective counter to the Lady Death meta, and because of all the armor, if they do get in your face, there's still a good chance that you have some success. Ultimately you don't want to be in the 10 meter range of a Hunter's Fury Lady Death user because they probably will win. That is where of course their build shines, but the point of this build is to get them low before they even get there, which will either cause them to be in that 10 meter range with low health, which means you'll probably win, or it will cause them to back off, which is also a good thing. So again, we'll start from the top and work our way down and then finish on the stats. Because this is a spotter build, we are using the technician specialization. A couple of benefits to this. One, it gives us the linked laser pointer, the long underbarrel rail attachment for any weapon that has that long underbarrel. So it goes on shotguns, LMGs, ARs, snipers if you want, rifles, anything that has a long underbarrel attachment. We also gain the +1 skill tier, which is fantastic for our shield, as this is a spotter in sync build. You need your shield to proc in sync, and the 4 blue plus the 1 yellow from technician equates to a tier 5 shield, which of course enhances it even further. If you decide to use a damaging skill as your secondary skill, you also gain +10% skill damage as well, which is a nice little feature. My personal weapon of choice with any spotter build, as the whole point of this build is to deal damage from range, is a FAL. The FAL is one of the best, if not the best, assault rifle in the game. It doesn't quite do the highest DPS. The Police M4 and the FAMAS do take over from the FAL in that sense, but it is definitely up there in, you know, easily in the top 5 ARs in the game, excluding exotics for DPS, and very, very close to the top end, you know, the sort of the top 3. The reason that I use this over those is because of the handling stats. It has exceptional damage drop off, again one of the best in the game. I think second only to the F2000, but of course the F2000 doesn't have the underbarrel rail that we need. It also has exceptional accuracy and stability, which means, as is the point from range, you want to be hitting as many headshots as possible, you know, even when they are quite a distance away. Ultimately doing more damage is only going to force them to use an armor kit or back off, or, you know, just shut down their play, and you're going to pulse them whilst doing that as well by using the linked laser underbarrel attachment that we gain from Technician. So just to show the description of this: Technician laser pointer that pulses targets at which it is aimed, underbarrel attachment for long rails. So, fantastic weapon. You want to roll it exactly as I have, with damage to targets out of cover as your attribute. This is simply the best minor attribute in the game, and comfortably so. It is also a multiplicative damage buff, and we need as much of that as we can on a 4-blue build. In Sync is a fantastic talent as well. It is quite simply the best damage talent in the game, even though it forces you to use a lot of skills. Hitting an enemy grants 15% skill damage for 5 seconds. Using a skill or damaging an enemy with a skill grants 15% weapon damage for 5 seconds, but the damage bonuses are doubled when active at the same time. So by simply popping your shield out and then firing, you're going to have 30% damage over the entire mag, as it takes roughly 5 seconds to empty a FAL mag. Yes, this is an additive bonus, but because it is active right from technically the second bullet of the mag onwards, it's just the best in slot. It not only has the gold medal for total mag damage, but also damage per second, which means that InSync is just, if you want a meta build, the best talent to use. The secondary that I'm using in here, just like the previous build, if you have a long range weapon, you want to have a short range. I've just gone for an SMG here. No real reason to use the swap chain. You can use anything that you want. An Optimus Vector is a great choice. Yeah, just stick on here what you want as a secondary in case somebody gets close to you and you've run out of bullets. You don't want an in-sync weapon as your secondary, because usually when you're swapping to this, you are already in the middle of a fight, which means it is likely that your shield is broken, that your armor is low. You just need a weapon that you can swap to and instantly do damage. So any SMG with Optimist or Measured, Unwavering I've gone for here, just for no reason whatsoever. I just like the gun. Yeah, you've got a few choices here. And then of course the Orbit or any finisher pistol, just to get that little bonus in crit chance and crit dam. You do need to down and kill with this to get it, but if somebody's very low and you've run out of bullets, just swap to it, finish them off, and then yeah, jobs are good. So the build itself, as I said, we are running 4 blue with the Coyote's mask and a bunch of multiplicative damage on here. The way that you want to spec your build is pretty much the same as mine. The best way that you can squeeze damage out is to run the double Walker, Contractors and Foxes with Fenris for your base weapon damage, and then Coyotes to buff your crit chance, crit damage. The only version that beats this is if your stat rolls aren't quite as good as mine. You may wish to consider, instead of the double Walker and Harris, a Seska and a Grupo. This hits harder on the crit front, but does less damage on the base damage bullets, so the non-crits, and as a result usually equates to a little bit less damage, but we're talking like tiny percentages here, usually within about 2 or 3%. So if you prefer the Seska Grupo, you've got more of those than Walker, that is fine. If not, I still prefer the double Walker. I just think it performs better on a blue build, and you know, the high base damage means that if you do get a mag that doesn't crit that well, then it performs actually better. So we are using Coyote's mask, as you know, we have been able to roll our Chester blue. If you haven't rolled your Chester blue, just run this build as 3 blues and still run the Coyotes, so don't worry too much, but the 4 blue is definitely better for survivability. Of course, this comes with crit chance and crit damage across the board, which is what we need on every single piece, and this simply means that we can take advantage of the close range and mid-range talent. 0 to 15 meters just gives us and our entire team 25% critical hit damage, and the 15 to 25 meter, which is where you should be, gives you and your team 10% crit hit chance and crit damage. For this reason, you need to be speccing this build, or really any spotter in sync AR build, to 50% crit chance exactly when you are using Coyotes, or maybe just a little bit over if you can't quite get it dead on. This is because you can still benefit quite a lot from the 25% crit damage at the close range, as you've still got 50% crit damage, half your shots will be critting. But if you are further out, you're going to gain the 10% to bring you up to the chance cap, and then still 10% crit damage on top of that. So Coyotes is just fantastic for any long range AR build. The chest piece that we're using is one of our 2 Walker. The 1 piece gives us 5% additive weapon damage, and the 2 piece is 5% multiplicative damage to armor, which is fantastic. It is all about the 2 piece with Walker. Once again rolled to crit chance and crit damage, and I have been able to roll this to blue. As I said before, if you can't get your chest or back roll to blue, they are very hard to do so, as you've also got to factor in the talent when re-rolling, so there's essentially a lower chance that you'll get a good roll. Don't worry about it, just 3 blue 3 red will be fine, particularly if you pair it with one of the tank builds from the first part in this series. Spotter is an amplified damage talent that gives us 15% additional weapon and skill damage to pulsed enemies, and we are of course running the link laser under barrel to apply that pulse. So very easy to have this talent active basically 100% of the time. There is no reason why this wouldn't be active. You could also use other talents here, but Spotter is, I think, better than Obliterate, as it has a damage right from the start and it provides such valuable information to your team. If you can see people running to the right or left, for example, you could quickly zoom in on them, post them, and if you are not on comms with the rest of your team for whatever reason, at least your teammates can still see them. So for me, Spotter is the best damage talent in the game for an AR build, but Obliterate definitely gets an honourable mention because not only can it hit higher damage, but it can achieve that quite easily with a fast rate of fire weapon. As I think the FAL is best in slot for this build, I have opted to go for Spotter. I just think the combination of the two is better, but please bear in mind that Obliterate is a fantastic choice. The second piece of Walker Harris & Co. is my holster, once again rolled to crit chance, crit damage and armour. What we then do is move over to the two most important parts of any AR DPS build, which is Fox's Prayer and Contractor's Gloves. Whilst we gain no benefits from the Petrov and Overlord weapon buffs, we do gain substantial benefits from the 8% damage to targets out of cover from Foxes. I have these rolled to crit damage with armour. You want to try and get a pair of these with crit chance or crit damage, it really doesn't make a difference. And you want to get a pair of the Contractors with the same. Ideally rolled to blue as well. These give us the 8% damage to armour. As these are both multiplicative, they stack incredibly well with each other and offer drastic damage increases even on a 4 blue build. Again, if you do wish to see this in action and a better description of this, please check the link at the top of your screen now, and of course that same video is linked in the description below. That is essentially a guide on just how much extra damage multiplicative damage talents do, and I've used this exact build to test it so you can see the difference with Foxes and Contractors. We finish on our Fenris backpack. It is probably just as important actually with Foxes and Contractors to get your base weapon brand set included. So of course Fenris for assault rifles is that 10% assault rifle damage is additive. It just goes with your base AR damage, but then all of your multiplicative bonuses enhance that value. So Fenris just offers more damage than me having a Grupo here, for example. I've tested it out and it's close, but once again the Fenris just wins out. This is once again rolled to crit chance and crit damage, and this is the second of the 2 reds on my build, utilising the Vigilance talent. Vigilance is definitely meta. It is the best backpack talent in the game for damage, but you have to play accordingly. So this is a multiplicative 25% weapon damage increase, which is insane. When this is active, your build rips through people, but taking any form of damage actually disables the buff for 4 seconds. Now, this can be circumvented by using a shield, which we are using with an in-sync build anyway, but just bear that in mind. You need to play the build accordingly, and the skills that I've used are to enhance how Vigilance works. So that's all of the pieces just there. Once you've hit your 50% chance, so remember, don't go for 60 on this one, you want 50. Just use your mods, your weapon mods and everything to start with to get to the 50, and then everything else you want to roll crit down. So you can see I've got a crit down mod on all 3 pieces just here. The skills that we are using are the Crusader shield. This is a tier 5 shield because we have 4 blue on the build plus the 1 skill tier from Technician, so lots of survivability even though these shields get melted very quickly, so you need to use this sparingly, but this is your main source of in-sync, so it's very important to have this ready for each new fight. By having a shield active, if your opponent is not a great aim and doesn't hit their heads very well, so therefore they need to hit your shield, you will retain the Vigilance buff for longer, as this is only your own personal armor pool taking damage that disables this buff. Another great example is if you have bonus armor, say you've opened up a booster crate in Conflict and you've got 50% bonus armor, if that is taking damage, your Vigilance remains active. So as long as you play smart with Vigilance, it is super powerful with this shield. My second skill is almost always the decoy, particularly in the dark zone, but a fantastic second choice, well actually first choice if it's in Conflict, would be the Striker drone, as what this essentially does is apply constant damage. Where is it? So this applies constant damage, which means your in-sync is constantly reprocking, meaning you're always at the 30% weapon damage once you fire that first bullet. It is enhanced by the +1 skill tier from Technician, and the +10% skill damage from Technician, and the 15% amplified damage from Spotter. So for conflict, I highly recommend the striker drone, and if all of that wasn't enough, it can easily see enemies that you might not be able to see. Whichever button that this is assigned to, in my case right bumper on Xbox, will always hover over the head of an enemy, even if they are in cover. So it's a great way of spotting people earlier than you usually would. So for conflict, absolutely the striker drone. For the DZ, I mean the holographic decoy, the distraction decoy is just best in slot, as it takes you, you know, your health and armor stat away from your head, allows you to get some crazy flanks and just get away if needed. So that is the build there. What we'll now do is look at the stats, and then we'll move on to the third and final build of this video. So we are currently sat at 42k base weapon damage, but once again this isn't being enhanced by any of the amplified or multiplicative damage bonuses yet. As stated earlier, you want to be aiming for 50% chance on this build when using coyotes. If you instead use the Sesko, just go for the 60%, and then everything else can be put into crit damage. Mine of course is at 140%. Now this may seem like a low stat, you can get AR builds out there with 160, 170, but don't forget that all the multiplicative damage buffs of this build enhance the base damage of the weapon, and therefore the crit damage, which of course is based off of that base damage. So even though this stat may seem lower than what you might have seen, I can promise you that your crits will hit hard. Moving down, we have 13% armor damage, which is amazing. We also have 18% damage to targets out of cover, with the 10% from the weapon and 8% from foxes, although it doesn't show in the stat page for some reason. And 21% health damage, which is great versus enemy deployed skills and enemy agents that are in the final part of their total health pool, the health only section. Moving down to my armor stats, you can see that I'm once again at the 1.474 million, as this is of course a 4 blue build. No armor on killer armor regen, everything else is just based on the watch level being at 1000 or higher. So that is the spotter in sync build, build number 2. What we're now going to do is move on to the third and final build, which is a no shield AR build. Okay, so we're now on build number 3. This is a more traditional build utilising Optimist and Unbreakable. This can be used with the shield if you want. The beauty of this build is a bit more flexible with the pieces that you choose and the skills that you choose as well. So ultimately what weapon, specialisation and skill you go for can vary. There are a few things that you definitely want to be including in this build. I would say Foxes and Contractors and Fenris, those three are an absolute must. And then on the other side, or wherever they can fit, you can either go for the Sesko Grouper Coyotes combo, which is probably better than what I have, I would say, for a 3 blue build. Or you can just do what I've done and go for the Sesko Double Walker for the increased multiplicative damage, which is almost as effective on this build. Ultimately, it depends on the talent that you use, if everybody else has coyotes in your team and how you want to build it. But this is just a standard Unbreakable 3 blue, 3 red build that has a bit of flexibility. Once we've completed this build, I will be going to the base of operations to show you some honourable mention talents that you can put onto this build. So you can look at this one as a bit of a base template, and then you can go from there. Let's start from the top. I did go full sharpshooter with this particular build purely because, well, 2 reasons actually. One, it's always good to have a mixture of specializations in your 4-man group. So let's say you've got your, I don't know, your perfectly efficient survivalist tank. He can give everybody the 10% extra damage to status affected enemies. You've then got your Lady Death guy on firewall, which means you'll get 10% damage to, you know, enemies within 10 meters of them. The reason I like sharpshooter here is because it gives everybody 10% headshot damage when we are sat further back, which I do quite like to do on a no shield build. But on top of all of that, it gives us the 15% stability, which is great for a weapon such as the FAMAS. You know, usually the better DPS weapons in the game are the faster rate of fire ones, and as a result their handling stats aren't amazing, so having the extra stability really helps. It also gives us a very powerful armor kit, one of the, probably the second best actually in Conflict in the Dark Zone. Very underrated in the sense that it cleanses all status effects. You know, I find there are tier 6 status players in almost every game of Conflict I play at the moment, so this armor kit has come in clutch for me on more than once, and until status is nerfed I think it is going to be one of the better ones. But if you prefer to go gunner here for the extra ammo back on something like a FAMAS or Firewall, it actually doesn't make a difference. You can totally change this out. The weapon that we've gone for is the FAMAS. This is quite simply the highest DPS AR in the game outside of exotics. It has extremely good burst potential, and I like to run this with Optimist. This is an additive bonus that means our weapon damage is increased by 3% for every 10% ammo missing from the magazine. Again, I'm going to go through some good talents at the base of operations shortly, but Optimist is one of the better ones, as you don't need to do anything to proc it, you just need to fire your weapon. And for a high rate of fire weapon like the FAMAS that has the best burst capability of any AR, it's just, yeah, a match made in heaven. Once again, you need to make sure that your assault rifle damage and your damage to targets out of cover are rolled as highly as possible on the weapon. Health damage is less important because it only affects deployed skills and enemy agents when they're already in their health, which usually means they're basically dead. But of course, the higher you can get this, the better. Once again, running a short range weapon as a secondary, so if I need to I can just swap to this and instantly get a kill. What you use here is entirely your decision, but of course the Orbit is still best in slot for our sidearm or any finisher pistol. So what we'll do with this build, let's start from the important parts first. We're going to use, and you should be using, contractors and foxes. Again, I know I've already said this in the previous build and I've said this in previous videos. Super important. You get so much extra damage from these when you've got some blues on your build, and even when you haven't, that there is no reason not to run these. So make sure you start by placing these two on your build. If you've got them rolled to blue like I have, fantastic. If not, don't worry about it. We can look at rolling the holster or the mask, but you want to try and get ideally a blue set of these because it makes the rest of your build so much easier to put together. Having a 4 blue build but then having to utilize turning the chest or backpack blue is usually difficult because you've also got a talent to worry about, whereas with these you don't. All you need to do is get a contractors with some form of crit chance. Bam, that's your PvP gloves set up right there. Same for foxes. Get one pair with either crit chance or crit dam. Ideally crit chance is usually better, and then just roll it to blue, and you can optimize it if it's not as high as mine. So yeah, definitely start with these two. The next item that you need to be starting with is your backpack. Now I'm using the same backpack as the previous build because one, this is Fenris, so this is the part of the build that is important. For an AR build you need to be getting that Fenris on there with the contractors and foxes. The other 3 pieces are up for debate, but Fenris is a must. It just gives too much base weapon damage for your crits and non-crits to not be usable. I'm once again going for vigilance here, but again I will give you some honourable mentions in the base of operations just after this. Vigilance is quite simply that 25% multiplicative damage buff. Fantastic, but bear in mind we are not using a shield here, so there is a chance that this will be lost more frequently, and if that is the case I will show you some fantastic alternatives in just a moment. Luckily vigilance pairs very well with a high rate of fire weapon, as if, let's just say you see somebody and you start firing into them and you've got roughly half a second before they turn around and fire back into you, which would of course lose your vigilance buff. If you have a 900 RPM weapon, you're going to get off, well, like a much larger amount of bullets in that window than if you had, say, the FAL, which you would get a lot less off. So you're essentially getting more of a damage bonus because vigilance is affecting a larger percentage of your mag. It does pair best with high rate of fire weapons and even better with something like measured. So just bear that in mind. The other 3 pieces of the build, as I said earlier, you could either go with the better version, which would be Coyotes, Seska, Grupo, or you could go with what I've gone for here. If you just want to be at the 60% chance cap without using Coyotes, or 3 people in your team already have it, then what actually ends up being better is the double Walker Seska. This is also great for obliterate builds where you need to be at 60% regardless, because obliterate only ramps up on critical hits, and if you've got Coyotes and you're sat at 50% and they're in close range, you will be critting less. So yeah, I'll let you guys decide whether you want to go for Coyotes, Seska, Grupo, or double Walker Harrison Co with the Seska. It's, you know, test them out the firing range. I like this combo here. So of course the double Walker gives us the weapon damage and the multiplicative damage to armor. Once again, these are all rolled to weapon damage, crit chance and crit damage. The chest piece is rolled in exactly the same way, and we have gone for the Unbreakable talent here. When we change this over to PvP, you can see that when your armor is depleted, you do repair 50% of your base armor stat, which on a 3 blue build is 1.3 million. The cooldown is 60 seconds unless you go for the Badger Tough Perfect version, which is 55 seconds. This works really well, and you can definitely adapt your playstyle around this. If you have this ready to kick in, you can play quite aggressively. If you don't, you just want to sit a little bit further back, keep your vigilance active for longer, and then yeah, just go from there. The second Walker and Harris is once again rolled to crit chance and crit damage, but this part I have rolled to blue. So I had a lot of flexibility here because I've got the contractors and the foxes rolled to blue, and I'm going to say it one more time, get out there and get farming until you get a blue pair for yourself, because it's going to make your creating builds for PvP 10 times easier if you have these set to blue already. I can promise you it really will make a difference. So I just rolled the second Walker there, and then of course the other 3 pieces have been left as red. Now once again we have a lot of flexibility with the skills, just like we do the specialization and the weapon on this build. So I opted for the decoy just because the decoy is one of the most powerful PvP skills in the game, and then the booster hive to counter status, as I don't want a tier 6 stinger hive to proc my unbreakable when I want that in the middle of a fight. So the booster hive will cleanse all status effects. It will give me a nice handling buff of 22% with a stim efficiency mod on there, which means that my FAMAS will fire more stable, even on top of the 15% stability from sharpshooter. It will reload faster, it will have less bloom. So the booster hive is a great skill to pair with a weapon that has poor handling stats such as the FAMAS. But again, some honourable mentions would be the EMP sticky bomb. That probably is the single best skill to use in conflict if you can aim with it. It's just ridiculously good. Obviously a shield, if you do prefer to use a shield with this build, there is no reason why you cannot. You just don't need to whip it out so early in the fight, as you don't need in-sync to be procced. EMP jammer is also fantastic if you want to go for a stinger hive, if you want to be that guy. You know, you've got a lot of choices with the skills on this build. If you're coming into this video as a relatively new PvP player, I'll probably still recommend the shield and decoy combo just to give yourself more survivability. But as you progress and tweak the build to your own playstyle, you can absolutely change those up. So let's have a look at the stats on this build. Our base weapon damage is 35,000, just over, but again this isn't factoring in all of the multiplicative damage bonuses of the build. We are actually set a 55% chance, which should be 60%, so I've clearly missed off a mod of my weapon there. If that ever happens, just make sure you do it from your weapon only. So you can see I've got crit damage, crit chance, crit damage. What I'm going to do here is just change this to crit chance. This is such an awesome skin, by the way. If you haven't got this skin yet, I think this came from last season, but I love this FAMAS unique skin. Just a little distraction from the video there. So the corrected stats are 60% crit chance, 146% crit damage, and then just the default headshot damage for an AR with your watch maxed out. We do still have the 13% armor damage that we had in the previous build, which is amazing, and of course the 18% damage to targets out of cover, 10% from the FAMAS, 8% from the Fox's Prayer. Health damage is on there because it is an AR, and the rest of these stats are just based on, in this case, sharpshooter, buffing my stability from 10% to 25%, with of course the rest of it coming from my maxed out watch. If we go down to my armor stats, you'll see that I'm at 1.287 million, as this is a 3 blue build with no armor on kill or armor regen, no health on kill, and the rest of the stats are just based on the maxed out watch level as well. So there it is, build number 3. What we're now going to do is go to the base of operations, where I can show you some other talents that you could factor in on this particular build. I'll say the other two builds are pretty fixed, but this one is just look at it as like a template from which you can put your own flavour on. Yeah, we'll go through some talents that might be suitable there. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the talents on the weapon first of all. You saw I run a FAMAS there with Optimist. Now, just to clarify, this is the same build that we just looked at, the 3 blue, 3 red, Vigilance Unbreakable Optimist FAMAS build. We already know that the specialisation is easily changed from Firewall, Gunner, Demolitionist if you really want. You're really not restricted there at all. But what we're going to do is have a look at some weapon talents. So, there are a few that get a honourable mention. We are of course running Optimist just because this is one of the best talents in the game, as you don't need to do anything to proc it. Now of course we all know that InSync is quite simply the best, but we already covered that in the second of the 3 builds, so we're not going to look at that one just here. What I'm going to do is go through some other talents that work just as well as Optimist. None of these will be quite as good as InSync admittedly, but a lot of these come pretty close. So Optimist of course being one of them. Technically the second highest damaging talent after InSync is Strained, but this relies on you having a low rate of fire weapon or a weapon with a large mag. For example, if you're running a True Patriot build with 30% additional ammo, Strained is one of the best things to run on your weapon to make up for your lack of damage, as you gain 10% critical hit damage every half second that you are firing. So after 2.5 seconds you hit that 50% cap. Fantastic for weapons such as the AK, the AUG and the FAL, the lower rate of fire, and the MK16 as well. Sadist is fantastic for Ridgeways builds, so if you are running one of these DPS builds, let's say the Hunter's Fury, you've instead put a Ridgeways chest and a Wicked backpack on. Sadist is actually an amplified damage talent, even though it doesn't state it here, it shows it as additive. It is amplified and therefore exceptionally powerful. 20% amplified damage versus bleeding enemies. There are of course the eyeless and ignited versions for blind and burn, but they are less easy to apply. As Ridgeways does it all for you, Sadist is a must to run with that build. Ranger is fantastic for the ARs that have, just to quickly demonstrate this actually, if you have an AR that follows the damage drop off, not like this, if you look there you see that it follows a traditional, stays steady until about 35 meters, then drastically drops off until about 75 meters where it is 0. If you're running, I know the F2000 and the FAL have this one here. So can you now see that new orange line? I don't know how easy it is to see with that background, but that you see that now not only has higher base range at about 40 meters, but then it slowly tails off and still does damage right up to 100 meters. Let's see if there are any other. So no, that's the same. AK is the same. I think it's just the F2000. I'm sure there's a third one, but you see the F2000 has the same there. That long, you know, your damage essentially stays higher for longer. That type of AR, Ranger, is a fantastic talent. It is also an amplified damage talent. Oops, I've done that wrong, haven't I? Go back to the correct place again. Recalibration library. There we go. So Ranger gets an honourable mention. Admittedly, when you are close to an enemy, it does nothing at all. But if you always play at range, if you're running a 6 red glass cannon build, for example, you could absolutely run Ranger and do a lot of work with it. So it definitely gets an honourable mention. I don't think it's as good as Optimist or Strained, but depending on the range, this is exceptionally powerful. Moving further down, we have, of course, in Syncs. We all know this is the Daddy. And then the final one that I want to talk about is Measured. Measured is a pretty good talent at the moment. The damage loss from the first half of the mag is only additive, but the damage increase in the second half is actually multiplicative, so it is a lot better since they buffed it. I think it was more than a year ago now. This, I would say you would only ever use Measured if you're running Obliterate, because the 20% increased rate of fire on the first half of the mag, particularly on a high rate of fire weapon, you know, such as the FAMAS, for example, or the Police M4, means that you can build your Obliterate stacks exceptionally quickly. And then when you come into the second half of the mag, where you're hitting that real hard hitting multiplicative damage, you've already built up more stacks than you would have done in the same window. So Measured, when paired with Obliterate, is actually very powerful and highly underrated, but outside of Obliterate, I don't recommend it. It is still good, and it can achieve similar damage to Optimist, but it is still less damage than Optimist, and certainly less damage than in Sync and Strain, so just bear that in mind. Measured plus Obliterate equals good, Measured plus Unbreakable equals bad. Right, that's the weapon talents. We'll quickly have a look at some chest and back talents to replace out with the ones that we have. Only a few here and then we'll be finished, so thank you for your patience with this so far. So of course we're running Unbreakable on our test build here with 3 blue 3 red. We all know that Spotter is fantastic. This is great for the in-sync build, and in my personal opinion, the single best chest talent for AR builds in the game if paired with in-sync, purely because it is amplified. You can pulse enemies with the link laser under pointing from Technician, so we're not just talking about a great damage increase, but the additional information you are feeding yourself and your team via that constant pulse from your weapon just makes a Spotter build pretty much the best way you can spec an AR. However, we have some other contenders. Unbreakable is a very close second for me. This is ye old faithful, just get half of your armor back whenever you lose your armor every 60 seconds, which isn't that long. This for me is probably tied for the top spot. It is amazing in 1v1s, pairs incredibly well if you have a tardigrade tank on your team, as you will end up with basically the same armor back, so your opposition will have to kill you twice in order to kill you once, if that makes sense, just because of the crazy way that Unbreakable procs at the same time as tardigrade. Glass Cannon, I like my 6 red builds in Conflict, not so much in the Dark Zone these days because the NPCs are everywhere, and I do run them less in Conflict because there's so much status, which really takes away from the 6 red builds, but Glass Cannon still gets a mention. If you run this on a 6 red with a long range AR like the FAL, or a high burst weapon like the FAMAS, or my personal preference, the Eagle Bearer, if you can hit those headshots, this talent is God tier. Nobody will kill you faster than a Glass Cannon user, but you will kill nobody faster than a Glass Cannon user. If you get the first shot on a Glass Cannon guy, they will die. 100% they will die. So if you know how to play Glass Cannon, you know how to stay out of sight and play your flanks, God tier talent, absolute best in the game. However, with the abundance of status and Eclipse in the game at the moment, this has fallen off of the radar just a little bit. Focus also gets an honourable mention. This one's a bit of a weird one. I've seen some players use this to great effect, and it is becoming more prevalent in the Dark Zone at the moment, but you need to be using an 8x scope on an AR, which is absolutely fine, and you need to be aiming a lot. This is a multiplicative damage talent of 50%, which is insane. Massive, massive, massive amounts of damage. You can retain the focus buff, if any of you remember this from before, by simply ADSing quickly on and off, because you get about a half-second window before it stops providing the focus buff. So it basically builds up as you're aiming down, but if you stop aiming down, it will just reset. You can keep flicking in and out of your ADS whilst moving or in cover so that you're not permanently out of cover to retain the 50%, and then as soon as someone gets in your line of fire, they are dead. This talent does huge amounts of damage. I'm not going to talk about Gunslinger because it doesn't work very well. I don't rate this talent at all, but the final two that I'm going to talk about, so only two more, yep, is Obliterate, one of the best damage talents in the game. This is not that much less damage than Glass Cannon, but you do need to build it up, and you can only build it up to the 25 stacks for the 25% multiplicative increase by landing critical hits. So this is where I said measured is fantastic. If you run a high rate of fire weapon with optimist or measured with high crit chance, so never run Obliterate with coyotes, by the way. You don't want that 50%, you need to be at 60% by default. This, by the time it gets built up, it'll outperform Spotter, and do not that much less than Glass Cannon, but of course you don't have the negatives. So an awesome talent with high rate of fire weapons only, and measured on high rate of fire weapons. And last but not least is Trauma. This pairs beautifully with Wicked, which we're going to come to on the backpack talents in a second, in a different section. You simply have two separate cooldowns of 30 seconds each. Any body shot applies bleed, any headshot applies blind. If you've got a little bit of status on your build, say the Anarchist Cookbook, which is a golem backpack for the 10% status effects, and maybe just a few other bits thrown on there, this blind can last for an obnoxious amount of time, and all you've got to do is shoot them in the head, which you're going to be doing anyway. So a fantastic talent when paired with Wicked in particular. Right, the final part of this video is backpack talents. So of course we all know Vigilance is, technically speaking, on paper the best in the game, but it is very easy to lose that bonus, and then all of a sudden you go from 25% to 0. So sometimes, and I think nowadays more often than not, particularly if you don't run shields, it is actually good to come away from Vigilance, as you know, having 25% extra damage maybe only 20% of the time, because of course you're just going to get shot and lose it, versus maybe having 15% damage all of the time. Well, actually the 15% wins out even though it's a lower number. A great example of that is Companion. Actually, one of my friends, Bash from the Clan on the Move, OTM, on Xbox, recommended this little trick, and I've seen it done before, but I hadn't even thought about it. If you just run a Seeker Mine at your side, it's a dead skill because you won't actually be using it. They last about 4 to 5 minutes in PvP. They last a crazy amount of time. And with Companion, while you are within 5 meters of your skill, or another ally for that matter, so this works with teammates, with healing hives, with decoys, Stinger hives, if you run around those, you'll gain a multiplicative 15% damage increase to both weapon and skill damage. Excuse me, to weapon damage only, I apologise. So just having a Seeker at your side all the time will not only allow you to see enemies, as if you have it assigned to a particular button, that button will appear on your HUD, but of course it gives you a constant Companion buff, and this actually equates to more damage than Vigilance if you are on the forefront of most fights, as you'll always have 15%, unlike Vigilance where you'll have it for the first half second of a fight and then it's gone for the rest of the fight. Concussion is the only talent you should ever use with an Eagle Bearer build or any headshot build. If you are running Eagle Bearer, Unbreakable Concussion is basically the go-to. This actually has the same damage, identical damage as Vigilance, as it offers two multiplicative bonuses that stack with each other, and because they are both multiplicative, it ends up being exactly the same as the 25% from Vigilance. 10% comes from just landing a headshot, and then if you get a kill with a headshot you get a further 15% for 10 seconds. Moving on to the second person and shooting their head, you'll gain the 10% on top of that, therefore equating to 25% total. I've tested this, it is literally identical to Vigilance in terms of damage. So with an Eagle Bearer where you're only hitting heads and getting headshot kills, this is a must. And then the last one that I want to talk about is Wicked. We've already discussed Adrenaline Rush anyway on the Lady Death build, but Wicked is one of the best backpack talents in the game if you are running Trauma, or if you are running an EMP Jammer or an EMP Sticky Bomb, and of course Ridgeways as well. Applying a status effects increases total weapon damage, so once again this is multiplicative, by 18% for 20 seconds. If you run the Anarchist Cookbook, not only is this Golem, which gives you 10% status effects by default, but it also gives you the perfect version, which is 27 seconds, which coincidentally lines up very nicely with the cooldown of the EMP Sticky Bomb and EMP Jammer without any skill haste on your build whatsoever. So perfectly Wicked with Trauma and an EMP skill, or with Ridgeways, or with a Stinger Hive is god tier. It does more damage than Companion, is up basically 100% of the time, and you don't lose it because similar to how you would lose Vigilance. So, a lot to talk about there. I apologise for the length of this video. There were a few things that I wanted to cover, and how much you can flex this build. You know, I just wanted to go through that. If you wanted to run Obliterate on your chest, measured on the FAMAS, Companion with a Seeker Mine, that build would do more damage than the one that you see in front of you and still be just as effective for survivability, even though you don't have the Unbreakable proc, because you'll just be killing stuff faster. So pick and choose the traits that have the most synergy for your playstyle, test them out. Please come back to me in the comments on your own personal preference of combinations of talents and weapons and so on. I'll do my best to respond to all of those comments, and until then, I will see you all in the next video. Peace.